I'm a poop connoisseur.
Awesome.
I
I don't think I've ever heard those words in the same sentence before.
Rabbit poop, alpaca poop, horse poop, cow poop, chicken poop.
Human poop.
I love them all.
That's a mistake. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Johnny Appleseed Organic Village. I'm here today with our farm manager, Joshua Andersen, and the topic of today's video is this giant pile of compost that you see behind us. I think we're going to go over the elements of what makes a functional compost pile work and how you can make one, hopefully that's a little bit smaller, because I doubt you need as much as we do.
They might.
They might.
Yeah.
It's possible.
You never
We're going to
know.
give you the calculation too, so you can scale up or down at your will. But anyway, before we do that, I think it's a good idea to go over the principal elements of what we're going to put in this thing and how it all works. I don't know what the answer to any of those questions are, so I'm going to turn it over to Josh.
All right. So the first thing to recognize when it comes to compost is there's not really a wrong way to do it. There's several different methodologies and thought concepts behind the way people compost, but there's no wrong way. You can dig a trench and bury it. You can throw it in a tumbler. The style of composting we're doing is based off of the Berkeley method, which is a roughly 30-day start to finish pile. It runs around 155 to 165 degrees.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
It's extremely hot.
Yeah.
I sit in saunas that are that hot.
Yeah.
Why is it so hot?
There's a lot of thermophilic activity happening in the actual pile. Things are being born, growing, dying, and because there's so much activity, it essentially makes a bunch of heat.
Is that why we have steam lifting off the top of our
Yes.
pile here behind us?
If we wanted to drive the temperature up a little bit more, we could actually throw a tarp over this too. That would keep excess moisture out, and it would keep the heat in a little bit more.
But it can get too hot, right?
Yeah, it can. If you get up towards like 175, 180, you actually kill off a lot of bacteria.
That is not a very big margin for error, so I wonder what you do to check.
So there's a couple different ways you can check your compost. If you want to be cleanly, you just get a compost thermometer. It's essentially a big needle with a thermometer at the end of it.
That's interesting, because we don't have one of those here at the Johnny Appleseed
No.
Organic Village. So
I'm
left wondering what our farm manager does to check the
use
temperature
the ouch test.
of his beloved compost piles. What, pray tell,
I just stick my hand in the
is
pile.
the outage?
All I do is I stick my hand in the pile.
Okay.
And
Anyway,
if it kind of hurts, then I know we're right where we need to be.
I'm assuming you mean if it kind of hurts your hand, not if it kind of hurts your soul, because that's what it does to me, to know that you do that.
I think you should just lay on the pile.
I'm really glad that he came to work here during the time of coronavirus, because that means I don't have to ever shake your hand, and it's like totally socially acceptable. Let's not say we did. So with that being said, I think we should move on to there are 3 elements. How many elements
All right.
are there in
So generally, when it comes to compost, you use a carbon, a source of carbon, which is a brown material, dry material. It can be hay, it can be dry leaves, it can be, we have a lot of rice hulls, it could be rice hulls. As long as it's brown and dry, you want to make sure it's dry. And then you have your nitrogen, which is things that are green, like green grass clippings, your food scraps from your house, silage, green silage is one of the things we use here, and then manure. Manure is a nitrogen, and it's also an ingredient. So generally, you have your browns, your greens, and manures, and both your greens and manures are considered nitrogen.
Josh thinks of himself as something of a manure connoisseur.
I am a manure connoisseur.
Coining it. So why don't you go through
Hashtag.
the types of poop you like to use, and why you prefer different ones.
All right, so here we got a bunch of chicken manure because it was available. And chicken manure notoriously is really high nitrogen, so it runs what I call hot. It'll drive the temperature of a pile really, really high. So you have to be really careful with it. In the past, I've used a lot of horse manure because it's been really available. In Florida, I live near a bunch of horse stables, so I have ready access to horse manure. Cow manure is great. You have to make sure it's from, I prefer dairy cow manure because it's not dried from a field. Rabbit manure is great. It's really high nitrogen, and it comes pelletized, which is really cool. Charles would like me to use deer, but I don't have access to it.
I keep telling him we live in the middle of a giant wildlife refuge, so it's the perfect place to go forage for your own deer manure. And no one's doing it. We checked. We looked on YouTube. There's no one occupying the deer manure forage space.
Comment if you
on
think
the
I should
internet.
become a deer poo harvester. A crucial detail is in this style of composting, you want a very specific carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you want to do 30 carbon to 1 nitrogen. So my friend Charles here tends to think this is just a big pile of poop, and that's all that's in here.
If you smelled it, I think you would agree.
But pound for pound, there's much more carbon in here than there is manure. Manure is a way to drive the temperature up and get it going, but this is mostly a carbon system, because carbon is the main building block of soil. So if you want to build soil, which essentially composting is, you have to have tons of carbon in there.
So now I think it's time to move on and show you how we put this masterpiece together. We'll begin by creating a base for the compost pile out of the straw or hay that we've collected. Some people believe you should start this process with a layer of sticks or twigs, but we don't think that's necessary. The next step is to add a layer of the green, followed by a layer of manure. And then you just continue this process over and over and over again until eventually you get a really tall pile.
It's important to water your compost pile. This might seem a little bit weird, but if you want to keep your compost firing, you need to maintain a specific moisture. You can add too much water. So after I finish watering this, I'll show you my measurement technique to see if my pile's watered enough. So once you have your pile built and you've watered it, this is how I usually test to see if it has enough water. I will take a handful of whatever's in there, and I'll just give it a squeeze. There's probably a little bit too much water in this actually, but if water comes out, you know you're doing good. Here we have our finished compost pile. It's right along on the small side of things, but it'll still fire. This will cover a small garden with 6 inches of compost. Compost doesn't go a very long way unless you only use a little bit, which I use a lot. I'm heavy-handed with compost. So if you want to figure out how much compost you need for your garden space, you take the length of your garden space, multiply it times the width of your garden space, and then multiply that times the height in inches of how much compost you want to lay down. And then you divide that number by 324, and that gives you how many cubic yards of compost you need. And then also, this has a very specific flipping regimen. You build your pile, you let it sit for 4 days, and then you flip on that 4th day, and then you flip every other day for 18 days. And I like to say 18 to 28 in that range, because that gives you a little bit of wiggle room. If it's not done by 18, you just keep flipping until it's done. And
How do you know when it's done?
You'll know it's done because it doesn't smell bad anymore. It just smells like earth. And what I do is I'll take some compost and I'll rub it in my hands. And if it leaves like almost like an oily feeling in your actual in the lines of your hands, you know it's done, because that means it's down to a colloidal state, which means the particle size is very, very small.
I'm gonna leave that test up to you, buddy. All right, thank you guys for joining us for this video on how to create your own compost. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope our ridiculous banter didn't distract you too much. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure and check out Johnny Appleseed Organic on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and check with us next time for more tips on regenerative agriculture and the things that we do here at the Johnny Appleseed Organic Village.